And what I want to talk to you about is a New Year's revolution, and not so much a New Year's resolution. Our base text that we're going to examine this morning is Exodus 33:15, and Moses makes a statement. And I hope that this is the statement and the commitment of our hearts as we embark on this new year. In Exodus 33:15, Moses said to him, speaking of his conversation to God, "If your presence does not go with us, don't send us up from here." Tell two people, I need his presence. I need his presence. I need his presence. I am convinced, more so than in any time, what lies ahead in 2016, God's people are going to need his presence. It is not going to be enough just to come to church. It is not going to be enough just to have moral convictions about what's right and wrong, but it's going to be a year in which we are going to need to be saturated in God's presence. But first, let me talk to you about this. Resolution or revolution? Resolution or revolution? Here's some typical resolutions that we all make. I got my list, right? I got my list. I'm going to lose 20 pounds. I got my list. You got your list, right? We all talk about we're going to lose weight. We're going to eat healthier. I already went. My wife, one of my Christmas presents, I got the Power XL pressure cooker so I can cook healthy. Right? We'll become more organized. We're going to prioritize our time better, spend more time with the family for us workaholics. We're going to handle our money better. And of course, we're going to spend more time with the Lord. All of us make resolutions. These are all important and worthwhile goals, but here's the sad thing. Research indicates that by January's end of this year, 25% of our resolutions will already be broken. Some of you say you're going to give up sugar, but you put 3 in the coffee this morning. And the sad truth is this attrition rate is going to continue. So that up to 80% of our goals and our resolutions likely will have been abandoned after 6 months into our year. So what does that mean? Does that mean that New Year's resolutions in and of themselves are bad things? No. According to the dictionary, here's the definition of resolution. Resolution, it means a resolve or determination to come to a definite or earnest decision about something, to determine to do something. And in those areas of our lives, we need to make some decisions. We need to come to a resolve about improving the issues and the challenges that are in our lives. Resolution suggests the resolving of an issue, finding an acceptable solution to things in our lives. Let's look at what revolution means. According to the dictionary, revolution is a sudden, complete, or marked change in something, a single turn of a kind. Revolution suggests a system suddenly changing due to forces from within. Revolution is a fundamental change in power or organizational structure that takes place in a relatively short amount of time. When you look at your life, do you need a resolution or do you need a revolution? When we come back to our text in Exodus 33:15, here's Moses. And he says, God, if we are going to leave this place, I don't want to move any more forward in my life without your presence. Moses isn't making a resolution. Moses is seeking a revolution. He's saying, Lord, I need your presence. How many of you would say, God, I need your presence. I need your presence. Here's the context that we're working with in Exodus 33:15. Here, Israel has come out of Egypt. They've come out of bondage. They've spent 450 years languishing in slavery and bondage in Egypt. They cried out to God for deliverance. And one of my favorite passages of scripture says, and God heard their prayers and he remembered his covenant. They wanted God. They wanted out of their circumstances. They were done with being slaves, done with being in bondage. And God sent Moses to be a deliverer for them. And God gave this message to Moses to take the Pharaoh to say, let my people go so that they may come out and worship me. And so God, through 10 powerful plagues, brings deliverance through the Passover lamb. And Israel comes out of their bondage. Kind of like us, they come out of their old year and they step into what they hope to be a new year. But yet in that transition, y'all all know the story, they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Not too long after God brings them out of Egypt, the Bible says that they were loaded down with the wealth of Egypt. And not too long after that, they take the wealth that God had given them from Egypt and they use it to make the golden calf. Before God could even finish giving Moses the instructions for how they were going to live, Israel had already gone buck wild. And so now God has to come down and God has to bring punishment. God has to bring judgment. God has to put systems and processes in place in order that Israel could understand how to live and how to walk with him in relationship. See, when Israel cried out to God for deliverance, Israel wanted a resolution. See, because resolutions look to change the outside things in our lives, the symptoms, the circumstances. Israel wanted their external world to change. They wanted to be out from slavery. They wanted to be out from oppression. They wanted to be out from bondage. They wanted to get away from Egypt. They were tired of making bricks. They wanted the outside world to change. But revolution seeks to change what is internal. Revolution seeks to change what's in our heart. God wanted Israel to have a heart change. God wanted Israel to come out of Egypt, not simply because they were tired of Egypt. God wanted them to come out of Egypt that they might worship him. God wanted them to come out because he wanted to have intimacy and he wanted to have a relationship with them. God is calling you and I as we come out of our 2015. God's calling us in 2016 into a place of intimacy, into a place of relationship with him. Do you want a resolution or do you want a revolution? I feel like I should have some Kurt Franklin playing in the background. Do you want a revolution? To understand the keys to this principle of revolution for 2016, we have to take a look at our scriptures. So when we go back to Exodus 33:15, there's first thing that we have to understand when we look at this story in its context. First principle for you and I to take hold of in 2016 is this. God has an appointed place for you. God has an appointed place for you. Is anybody cold in here or is it just me? It's cold. Yeah. Marv, you see that heater on there? If you press the button up, it'll kick the heat on. God has an appointed place for you. I know if I'm cold, everybody else is cold. Yeah, just take that lid off and hit that arrow button at the top. There you go. Hear it? Heat's kicking in. All right. Back to the text. Exodus 33:1. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promise you on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. If we are going to have a revolution, the one thing you and I have to be convinced of at the start of our year is that there is a place, there is a destination, there is some appointed place that God has for you and I to get to in 2016. You have to believe that there is an appointed place for you. I don't care where you are right now. I don't care what 2015 has been for you. You have to have a conviction in your heart that there is an appointed place, there's an appointed time, there's an appointed season for you in 2016. Because if I don't believe that, if Israel never believed that God had an appointed place for them, what was the need to move out of Egypt? And notice what God says. I want you to go up. Look at somebody and say, it's time to go up. The move of God, the call of God is always a call to go up, not sideways, not backwards, not holding still, but God's call for your life, for my life, is always a call to go up. It's time for us to move up, y'all. It's time for us to move forward. Second thing I have to have as a conviction that I have to have a resolution about in my heart and in my mind is that God has promised you and I victory. Look at Exodus 33, 2 and 3. Look at the next two verses. God says, I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Merizzites, the Heptites, and the Jebusites. That's a lot of ites. Watch this now. God says, I will drive out all these tribes, all these pagan nations that were occupying the land and that were barriers and resistance to Israel possessing what it is that God called them for. All of these tribes, they represent spirits. Because the one thing about the Old Testament, right, the Old Testament is full of types, patterns, and examples. A lot of things that we see in the Old Testament are physical images of spiritual truths and realities. And these tribes, 6 of them, 6, not 5, not 7, not 8, 9, but 6. And they speak to what seeks to hold back man from possessing what it is that God has for them. These 6 tribes. Let me give this to you real quick. The Canaanites. The Canaanites represent the spirits of addiction, perversion, exaggerated people pleasing. What are you hooked on? The Amorites. They represent oppression with obsession with earthly fame and glory and domineering. Are you a control freak? There's deliverance for you. The Hittites represent subliminal torments, phobias, fears, depressions, lying, and deceit. The Perizzites, they represent limited vision, laziness, low self-esteem. The Hivitites, they represent vision limited to just enjoying earthly pleasures, earthly inheritance, and hedonisms. And the Jebusites, they represent the suppression of spiritual authority in fellow believers and legalism. What's your challenge? Because if we are going to possess the land God is calling us up to, you and I are going to have to fight this. But the promise that we have from God is as long as we seek his presence, as long as we walk with him, we've got victory. Some of us, our 2015 didn't turn out the way we wanted to, not because we didn't want it better, but we didn't understand how to fight these enemies. And we tried to fight these enemies alone. God has victory for you. God said, I will go before you. I will fight your enemies. I will make sure that you are able to possess the land. Verse 3, he says, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people and I might destroy you on the way. Remember, this is shortly after the golden calf. And God said, listen, plans for you. I have desires for you. I have things for you to possess. I know what I have for you. I know what I want to do in you, for you, and through you. But there's an issue. The issue is never with God. God says, go up. Now watch this. He's always summoning us up. Even while he's calling us to go up, he says, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. That means everything that you need. He said, but I'm not going with you. Why? Because you got issues on the inside. If we can't reach the destination, God said, I'll take care of your enemies. But you've got issues inside. You've got a stiff neck. That means a hard heart. Watch this. Here's the thing I have to understand. Because I got some stuff on the inside. The next principle we got to understand is God requires you to lay some stuff down in 2016. God requires you and I to lay some stuff down in 2016. Look at Exodus 33, 4 and 5. It says, when the people heard these distressing words, God talking about listen, I got some stuff for you, but I ain't going with you because you're too hard-headed. You're too stiff-necked. You're too rebellious. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn. Watch this. And no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. Watch the next verse. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Watch this. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Oreb. We keep hearing and seeing in these verses again and again. Take off your ornaments. Take off your ornaments. Strip yourselves of your ornaments. Take off your ornaments. What are the ornaments? The ornaments represent, in the text, the ornaments represent what they came up out of Egypt with. And everything they came up out of Egypt with, God blessed them with it. They were slaves in Egypt, but when they came out loaded with wealth. Loaded with possessions, loaded with gold, loaded with rubies and precious jewels, loaded with fine fabrics, all the good stuff of the world. And you know, Egypt is a type and pattern of the world. So when they came out of the world, they were loaded with the world's wealth. And what did they do with it? When they got in the wilderness, they took it and they made an idol out of it. They took what God had blessed them with. They took the material wealth of Egypt, of the world, and they made an idol out of it. And they made ornaments to adorn themselves. What has God blessed you with that you've taken and it's become an ornament for you? It's become something that you use to cover yourself, something you use to give yourself identity, something you use to give yourself value. What's your bling? What's your bling? God's saying, you gotta get rid of the bling. You gotta take the bling off. Watch this. Hebrews 12:1. There's some stuff we gotta strip ourselves of. There's some stuff we gotta lay down. Watch it. Hebrews 12:1 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us do what? Throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Watch this. He says, throw off. He didn't just say, let us throw off the sin. See, there's some stuff in our lives, it is not categorically sin, but it is bling. It is an ornament. It is causing us to be weighed down in running our race. We can't go up because we're weighed down. I remember when I used to play basketball way back in the day. Back at South Mountain, they used to make us wear these vests to practice. Remember the weight vest? Put like 25 pounds on it, you had to run around, had to jump, play with all that, and then they take the weight off, you could jump higher, right? Some of us, we trying to run our race, and we weight it down. We got these vests of ornaments. We got these vests of things that represent the blessings God gave us because he loves us. And we are now using those things to substitute God, your job, your career, your money, your relationships, your children, your titles, all of these things that we take and they become what the center of our heart is. They become what our pursuit is. They become what our focus is. We worship the gift rather than the gift giver. And God is saying if we're ever going to go up, we got to strip some stuff. We got to lay aside every weight and sin. See, it's easy to look at the sin and say, man, I need to leave that alone. Oh, but the weights. Oh, but the stuff. Oh, but the ornaments. That's a whole nother game. It's still cold in here. James 4:4 says this. James 4:4 says, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. What does it mean to be a friend of the world? Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. For all that is of the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life are of this world, and this world passes away. When we get caught up, when we allow our hearts to be wrapped around the things of this world, we make ourselves to be enemies of God because we are weighted down. And when we're weighted down, we can't go up. God is saying you got to lay some stuff down this year. What do you got to lay down? You know it already. You know what you need to lay down. already. Next thing I need to understand, if I'm going to have a revolution and not just a resolution, I need to examine my relationships. I need to examine my relationships. Watch what Moses says here. It says, now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of the meeting outside the camp. Outside the camp. Remember, Israel was full of hard-headed, stiff-necked, rebellious folk. And so if Moses was going to encounter God, if the people were going to encounter God, they had to go outside of the camp. They had to go outside of the camp. See, some of us, we're trying to get to God. We're trying to meet God. We're trying to have God's presence in our lives. But we still walking with the stiff-necked, with the hard-hearted, with the rebellious. And I'm telling you, you won't meet God. Look at 2 Corinthians 6:17. Look at 2 Corinthians 6:17. It says, therefore, come out from them and be separate, says the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing. Again, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. The Bible says that bad company will do what? It'll corrupt good morals. Now, here's the thing. These were God's people. These were the ones that God had redeemed, brought out of Egypt under the power of the Passover lamb, under the covering of the blood. These were the ones when the death angel passed over Egypt that night, God covered them with his presence. So were they God's people? Yes. But still, Moses understood that if he was going to encounter God, and there were those in the camp who understood if they were going to encounter God, even amongst God's people, they had to get away from those that were hard-headed, stiff-necked, and rebellious. Amen. See, Paul said it this way in Corinthians. He said, listen, I've told you before, don't hang around with the adulterers, with the liars, with the thieves, with the whoremongers. Watch this. He said, now I'm not talking about those that are in the world. He said, I'm talking about those that call themselves a brother. See, this calling of separation isn't a calling of separation from those that are lost who need to be touched by the Spirit and the light of God that's on the inside of us. This calling of separation is a separation from those who call themselves a Christian, those that call themselves a brother or sister in the Lord. And listen, and they have no intention, no purpose, no resolve, no revolution, no commitment of heart to walk with God. And many of you have been playing with those folks for years. And you wonder why you can't go up. You keep dipping and dabbing, dipping and dabbing. And all those folks want to do is stay stuck. We need to get rid of the stuck folk in our lives. Because if they stuck and we hanging around them, guess what? We stuck. And we'll be right here in 2017, stuck. It's time to come outside the camp, folks. It's time to come outside the camp. If you're going to meet God, if you're going to have God's presence in your life, if you're going to have a revolution of heart, it's time to examine your relationships. Time to examine your relationships. Exodus 33:12, look what Moses says. Moses said to the Lord, he says, Lord, you've been telling me, lead these people. But watch this. He says, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Lord, I know you're calling me out. I know you're calling me out, but I don't know who's going with me. Stop waiting for folk to make your move. Stop waiting for folk to make your move. You got to go for yourself. The Bible says, let every man work out his own salvation with trembling and fear. So you all should be commended on this one point. You've got enough faith and enough vision to join a church that's a startup. See, there's many people who've come in here and left, not because they didn't like the word, it wasn't big enough for them. Because they want to go somewhere else based upon what everybody else is doing. Moses said, God, you ain't telling me who's going up. Because the commandment isn't to look for who's going up with you. The commandment is to go. Where you going? Where you going? Stop waiting for folk. Stop waiting for folk. This is the time to move. 2016, it's the time to move with or without. My pastor used to say this a long time ago. He used to say the glory train is coming through. You can either get on, you can get off, or you can get run over. You got to make up your mind that you're going with or without. Some of the folks that you're praying for, some of the folks you believe in God for, you think you're helping them by tarrying with them where they are. No, move. God will give you some wisdom. God will give you some discernment. God will give you some insight how to go back and help them. And then maybe, just maybe, if you just start focused on moving, you'll get enough of God's presence in your life that they can look and see something and go, oh, I want that. Second thing we have to have in our heart, if we're going to have a revolution and not just a year of resolutions, is we have to have a hunger and desire to know God. A hunger and desire to know God. Watch what Moses says to the Lord. He says, Lord, if you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you. Teach me your ways that I may know you. It's an interesting question here because Moses, he's seen the power of God. At this point, he's watched God deliver Israel out of Egypt with the 10 miracles, right? He's watched God part the Red Sea. He knows that God has some power. He knows what God can do, but yet he's not satisfied. He knows all about God's hand, but yet he's not satisfied. He said, Lord, I just don't want to know about what you do. God, I want to know you. Lord, I want you to teach me your way. Teach me your way. Watch this. In Psalm 103, verse 7, it says it this way about Moses' request. It says, he revealed his character to Moses and his deeds to the people of Israel. He revealed his character. Don't you want to know God's character? See, it's not enough for God to just be a religious theological concept. God is a person. God has a character. God has a way about him. And many of us, we know God's power. We know God's hand. We know what God can do, but yet we still don't know God. Moses experienced God's power, but yet he confessed, I really don't know you, Lord. Show me your way. Is that the cry of your heart? Do you want to know God's way in 2016? You want to be intimate with God? You want to understand his personality, his ways? You know how when you really know somebody? Anybody ever come to you about a friend and say, oh man, you know, your friend did this and this, and you go, no. You just don't know him. They didn't mean that by doing that. They didn't really mean that by saying that. You just don't know them. Once you know them, you can understand. See, there's a lot of things about how God wants to move. There's a lot of things about what God did through and for us in 2015 that we just didn't understand because we don't know him. We know about him, but we don't know him. Moses said, Lord, teach me your way. Watch Hebrews 3:10-11. Watch this. It says, this is speaking of Moses. It says, therefore, I was grieved with that generation. Talking about Israel in the wilderness. This is God. I was grieved with that generation and said, they do always err where? In their heart. That's the place where we need revolution. They do always err in their heart, and they have not what? Known my ways. And so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Go back to Exodus 33:13. Watch what the text says. Moses says, Lord, show me your way. God, I want to know you. And then watch this. It says, remember that this nation, they're your people, God. And the Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Hebrews says that Israel never found rest because they never knew God's way. 2015 has been burdensome for you, a lot of y'all. it's been weary. You put up a good front. You put up a good fake on everybody. But you know deep down inside you are weary. And you know why we get weary? We get weary because we don't know. Jesus said, come on. Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. Take my yoke upon me. Watch this. And learn of me. For I am meek and lowly. He says, and I'll give you some rest. See, rest doesn't come from our resolutions. Rest comes from a revolution of heart that says, God, I want to know you. I don't want to leave up this place. I don't want to go from 2015 through 2016 without your presence. In order to have your presence, I got to be convinced that you've got a destiny for me. I've got to be convinced that you'll fight my battles for me. I've got to be convinced, Lord, you've got a destined place for me. Look at 33:15. Exodus 33:15. Then Moses said to him, God, it's our base text. He said, God, if your presence doesn't go, don't send us up from here. How hungry are you for God's presence? God's presence is the game changer. God's presence is the game changer. Look at 33:16. Watch why Moses is emphatically saying, God, if we don't have your presence, I don't want to go. As he says, how will anyone know that you're pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? Watch this. What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? His presence. There's a lot of Christian doctrine, Christian teaching, and Christian theology out there that says the evidence of God's favor is materialism. But you don't need to know God to have stuff. Moses said that God's presence will distinguish you, that God's presence will produce something in your life that is distinguishable, that's distinct, that's separate than any and everything else in the world. If it's just about materialism, God's presence, again, there's a lot of folks that are atheists and got wealth. It can't just be the bling. His presence. God's presence was so evident in Abraham's life, even the heathens around him recognized the difference between their lives and his. This is what Amalek spoke unto Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. This heathen king was saying, Abraham, there's something different about you. God guides you. God preserves you. God blesses you wherever you go. God promised Joshua that no enemy could stand against him when God's presence was with them. Look at the promises. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so shall I be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Be strong and of a good courage. When God's Spirit is present with us, we can be strong and courageous because no enemy, no Ite, no Hittite, Jebusite, no Ite can stand against us. God told Gideon, the Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Go in this might, and thou shalt save Israel. God warned Jeremiah that the whole nation would turn against him and reject his prophecies. Yet God promised this, they shall fight against thee, but they shall not prevail against thee. Why? For I am with thee to save thee and to deliver thee. God's presence is the game changer. God told Isaiah for a special promise he makes to those he loves. He says, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by name. Thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, it will not consume thee. How many of you in 2015 have felt sometimes that you were over your head? God says, when my presence is with you, when the floods come, when you pass through the waters, it will not overwhelm you because I am with you. God's presence is the game changer. In 2016, if his presence doesn't go with us, I don't want to leave this place. I don't want to leave this place. What's your mindset? What's your heart conviction this morning? What revolution, what overturning, what changing of heart, what changing of authority and power structure is working and permeating in your heart? Are you looking for just an external change? Or are you looking for an internal revolution? You see, resolutions are all about doing. I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. But revolutions are all about being. A resolution is on the outside. A revolution is on the inside. A resolution goes after the symptoms, but a revolution goes after disease. Do you want a revolution? Do you want a revolution? Verse 17. I close with this verse. And the Lord said to Moses, I'll do everything you have asked. I'll go with you, Moses. I'll be with you, Moses. I got you. God's saying to you, 2016, I got you. I promise to never leave you and forsake you. I promise that I'll be with you always, even to the ends of the earth. I promise you that if you look to the hills from which cometh your help, I promised you that my eyes search through and fro throughout the earth, looking for a heart that's perfect towards me, that I might show myself mighty on its behalf. God said to Moses, I will do everything that you've asked because I am pleased with you. What is the basis of God being pleased with us? Listen to me very, very carefully. It ain't your performance. Because we can't be good enough. The moment you catch that is the moment you're positioned to go up. Because if you think it's your performance, here's what'll happen. You will leave here resolved to strive. And in your resolving to strive, you will fail. And then the spirit of condemnation and legalism will come on you. And that will draw you from the very thing you say you want, which is his presence. Because you know how it is when we say, God, I'm going to meet you every morning. I'm going to pray every morning. I'm going to read my Bible every morning. Monday come, Tuesday come, Wednesday come. We realize, oh, man, I didn't do it. We don't go back and say, Lord, I'm sorry. We feel distant. Oh, I broke my promise. Oh, I broke my word. See, we think God deals with us like we deal with us and deal with others. The basis of God being pleased with us is the fact that we placed our faith and our confidence in the one whose singular act on that cross pleased all of God's wrath, all of God's judgment, all of God's demand for righteousness in that cross. And that my response is to live these principles of revolution out of the grace that truth provides me in my life. If you try to do it on your own, you can't. You can't. And what little bit you do, you'll take the glory for it. And that's where spiritual pride comes in. Watch what Moses says. God said, I'm with you, Moses. I'm pleased with you because I know you by name. I know your nature. I know your character. Listen, God knows each of us. God knows you. He knows your little quirks, He knows your little, He knows all about you. He knows the stuff about you that can't nobody else stand. He knows all about you. And he loves you. And watch this. And then Moses said, now show me your glory. What do you want to see in 2016? You want to see his glory? See, oftentimes in the church, when we think about the glory of God, we think about services and people laid out in the front of the altar and all that. Been through that, right? We've been through that. We've experienced the power of God moving. Experience, I watched a girl get her ears healed. Nobody touched her. You could see the glory of God fall on her. We've been times when we were in fellowship together, laid out on the front carpet. One church we was at, the front carpet had so many stains in it from people laying on the altar, slobbering and weeping and crying. Glory of God. But that's the glory in the house. That's the glory everybody looks for. What if we saw his glory in our homes? What if we saw his glory in our marriages? What would it look like to see his glory, see his power, see his strength, see his essence, his nature, his character on our marriage, our relationship with our children, particularly those of us who got adult children? Anybody know what I'm saying? On our jobs, What if his glory was on our lives in 2016? His promise is we can see it. We can see it. Do you want a year full of resolutions? Or do you want a year full of revolutions?